Hi, and welcome back to Luke Talks. Today I'd like to talk a little about common sense and why I think it should have a place in philosophy rather than being constantly assaulted by philosophy. Like assertions such as there is no free will, there is no truth, there are no moral virtues, it's all relative, and such claims that seem to be pretty standard in modern philosophy, right? And I really have to wonder why that is. I mean, how can seemingly intelligent people fall for such dubious claims, and how can they engage in such blatant black and white thinking? It's really a mystery to me somehow. And I think it has a really bad influence on our minds and on our culture, even though many people don't engage in philosophical arguments, but it kind of seeps through. And you can see that all around that, people claim such things as all truth is relative, you have your truth, I have my truth. There is no free will, everything is predetermined and things like that. And it's really pernicious. So I think it's time to reclaim our sanity in a sense and reclaim our common sense. So what is the argument against common sense? It goes something like this. People in the past have believed all kinds of things that were thought of as common sense, such as the earth is flat, right? This has been proven wrong, so we must recognize that common sense is not reliable. Therefore, everything is up for grabs, right? That's the kind of thinking that I think is behind this onslaught on common sense. But this kind of thinking is deeply flawed, I think. That's why I want to introduce a very useful distinction that David Ray Griffin has made, and that is between hardcore common sense and softcore common sense. Softcore common sense are things like the flat earth example, right? So it's just something that people happen to believe, and it can be proven wrong, and so the belief changes, and that's kind of the natural scientific inquiry and progress. It's nothing really mysterious or something like that. But hardcore common sense, on the other hand, are things that even if we profess that we believe them, we just cannot live. We cannot possibly live according to this belief. So, for example, if someone says there is no truth and all truth is relative, or even that different people can't have access to the same data, and that's really a claim some people make, it just doesn't fly because you cannot live that way. So even if some philosopher, for example, claims that there is no truth and nobody can share the same truth and have access to the same data, surely if his car is broken down or needs repair, he goes to a shop and have the mechanic repair it. And surely the mechanic, has access to the same truth that his car is broken than he has, despite all his relativistic claims that he writes books about, right? It's just impossible to seriously live in the belief that there is no truth. It just doesn't make any sense. And in the case of relativism, of course, it's always self-contradictory, because if you claim there is no truth, then this in itself cannot be true, it's because there is no truth. So it's kind of silly. And I want to read you a quote from one such philosopher who made that claim. And it's really crazy. This is from one of David Ray Griffin's books. Quote, "Evidence from the psychology of perception all points to there being no such thing as a state of sensuous apprehension utterly unaffected by beliefs, desires and expectations, and consequently no experience of the given as such." In other words, we have strong evidence that there can be any evidence. I mean, seriously, what's wrong with these people? I really don't get it. But back to our problem with living out beliefs, because that's a really crucial point. It's what is called in philosophy a performative contradiction. That is, even if I say I believe something, uh, chances are I act in a different way. So that's the old pragmatic idea that we should consider how people behave, how people act, and not necessarily what they say they believe. In other words, their beliefs are really in their actions and not in the statements they make or something like that. It's the same argument that Jordan Peterson makes, by the way. And it's really well supported by psychology, right? Both by the behaviorist school, who says we should look how people behave, but also by the psychoanalytical school that said that we are powerfully motivated by unconscious beliefs that we cannot even formulate because we're not even aware of them, right? And there are more recent theories that go in a similar direction, such as Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and 2 or Timothy Wilson's Adaptive Unconsciousness. They all say, and there are tons of empirical studies and experiments who support this, that people are shaped a lot by their unconscious drives that they are not even aware of. So even if someone, let's say some philosopher, claims such absurdities as there is no truth, it just doesn't jive because, the way he lives his life just speaks otherwise. And the same is true for the claim that there is no free will. I mean, how can you possibly live if you're not if you're convinced that you don't have any choice? I mean, you make tons of choices every day. You just cannot live that way. So you act out the belief that you do have choices, regardless of the books you write. And by the way, if you write books denying free will, what's the point? I mean, you're trying to convince other people to accept your position, right? But if they don't have free will, it's just pointless. It's completely self-contradictory. And perhaps we can go even further. I mean, you can try that yourself. Try for a moment to think that you don't have any free will, that you can not make any choices. Just think it seriously. And I don't think you really can. I think it's impossible to even have that thought. I mean, you can, in a theoretical way, kind of think about that possibility, but you cannot really believe it. I mean, at least I can't, I mean, I can take the decision to move my hand now, or I can take the decision not to do it. I just can't even think that this is all predetermined. It just, doesn't make sense. But even if you can think something like that, you simply cannot live that way. So that's the performative contradiction. And I think it's very crucial to think about it and to understand this concept if we want to rescue common sense and if we want to resist the onslaught on common sense that seems so widespread in modern thinking. I think David Ray Griffin made a great point with his distinction between hardcore and softcore common sense, and it's a great starting point. And there are more candidates, for this kind of hardcore common sense beliefs that philosophy cannot simply argue away with their sophistery, right? For example, the law of non-contradiction. Maybe another candidate is that we cannot help but value things, to think of some things as better or worse. That's also a point Jordan Peterson makes, that our whole perception is very much related to our goals, right? And this might be survival in a Darwinian sense, but obviously we have all kinds of goals, and our perception seems to be really shaped in a deep sense by our goals that we can consciously decide. I can decide I have this or that goal, and then I will perceive the world according to that. So that's another candidate for hardcore common sense, maybe, that you cannot live otherwise. So any philosophy who denies that, I think, is on the wrong track, and at least it's a strong indication that it's on the wrong track. And if philosophers go too far in this kind of non-common sense or anti-common sense approach, and if they are living in their heads exclusively and are completely unhinged from reality, I think only sophistery can emerge. It's just, like intellectual games that are really destructive. I mean, they influence us, they influence society, they're seeping through and causing mayhem. And I think it's time to fight back and to find arguments to defend some of our hardcore common sense notions. And this brings me to an absolutely crucial point in my book. And this is that if we're thinking deeply about philosophical issues, we absolutely cannot ignore our full range of human experience. And I don't mean by that only sensual experience or data or what we see or something like that, but everything, the whole range, how we feel, when we are satisfied, when we find meaning in life, if we apply a certain theory, what happens to our relationships, to our well-being, to our health, and all of that. I mean, the full range of happiness, of satisfaction, of meaning, of higher aims and how to attain them, what works in this quest to better our character, and all of that. It all needs to be part of our theories. We need to ground ourselves in this full range of experiences if we're thinking about deep issues. If we do that, then we simply would never take the idea that there is no truth seriously. I mean, of course, we can and should think about the relationship between truth and our goals, or in how much bias we can have, because of our unconscious drives, and how our culture or our upbringing or our religious schooling or whatever can have on our consciousness and on our beliefs. All of that is obviously very important, but it's the interplay that produces deep thought. It's the looking at different sides and thinking hard about it, and just saying there is no truth, if it's so obvious that we cannot even live that way, just strikes me as extraordinary strange. And it's really a sign of the times, I think, that it has taken hold that much of modern philosophy. I mean, not all of it, but a lot of it. And it may have to do with materialism and the belief that they're in a strictly materialist universe that is basically lifeless. And if you make these assumptions, then it's hard to get out of some of the conundrums in philosophy. So that's it for now, folks. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope I see you again here on the channel. Have a great day. Bye bye.